Well, I am starting the recording here. Welcome, everybody. We just lost one of our panelists, or I'm sorry, one of our coordinators. I'm sure he'll be back on. A little bit of technical difficulties. Oh, here he is. Okay, great. Welcome back, Gray. We are just starting. I'd like to welcome everyone here to our first webinar on the CalVTP training. This is an introductory webinar. My name is Maurisa Fitzgibbons. I'm the brand new training coordinator for a CAL FIRE funded grant here at Cal Poly, where we are providing some workforce training to keep moving this needle forward on California's wildfire crisis. I am joined here with Gray Hayes. He's our Swan Pacific Ranch Director of Education and Research. And so I will introduce our two panelists here from CAL FIRE, Shannon Johnson and John Fitch, in just a moment. But what I'd like to do here first is just set up a couple webinar rules. If you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have any questions about using Zoom, please feel free to enter it into that question and answer. Gray will be monitoring that along with me. We're hoping that there's time for a Q&A time at the end of these presentations. That said, if you do not have time to get to your question, and I'll remind you of this later, you're welcome to email any other questions that we don't get to me, and I will compile them and forward them to our CAL FIRE partners here. Also, so we're not going to have a break in this. It's a 2-hour webinar. Our agenda today, I'm going to allow Shannon and John to introduce themselves and give their quick bios. Then we're going to have a quick overview of what the CalVTP is by Shannon Johnson, then a broader presentation on where we are and why this is so necessary to have this programmatic EIR available to us here in California. And then Shannon will go back to some of the nitty-gritty of the CalVTP, where it's applicable, and we'll show you where you can find some more materials to get your questions answered. There's a lot online at the Board of Forestry and CAL FIRE website. So again, thank you so much for being here. This program is funded by CAL FIRE, California Carbon Initiative tax dollars, moving towards more fire and forest, stable, resilient forestry here in California with an eye to fire safety. Hi, it's this morning. Hello, good morning. With that, I'd like to allow our two speakers to introduce themselves. Shannon Johnson, if you could just give us a quick bio on your position here at CAL FIRE right now.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. My name is Shannon Johnson, and I am our Vegetation Management Program Manager for the department. I've been with the department for about 18 years. I've worked in our vegetation management program, forest practice on our state forests, kind of moved all around in our San Diego unit, Shasta unit, also Mendocino, working out of Regions and Sacramento. I also have a degree in conservation biology, and I am a registered professional forester.
Thank you so much, Shannon. John?
Yes, hi, good morning. My name is John Fitch, and 20 years ago, I was sitting in the seats at Cal Poly. So I am born and raised here in California. After Cal Poly, I took a stint up in Oregon. So I was up there for about 15 years. While I was in school, I kind of got my start in the field on a hand crew with Forest Service. So I spent some time on the ground fighting fire locally there in the Los Padres. And then as I went up to Oregon, I did some land surveying and then got kind of plugged back into the Forest Service. I worked on the Deschutes National Forest. And then in 2010, I started with Oregon Department of Forestry, where I managed a 70,000 acre state forest. We did everything from pre-commercial work and fuels work, grant work, to commercial harvesting, and it all kind of stemmed back to healthy, resilient forests. So in 2018, I came back home, came back here to California, and then in 2020, or just in October, I recently promoted to my current position as prescribed fire coordinator. And I see this role as kind of a bridge builder between units and also bridge builder to outside collaborators.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah.
Shannon, would you like to get us started on the program overview?
Sure, give me a second to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that. All right, so I'm just gonna, nope,
Shannon, we can't see it yet.
can't see it yet. Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to give a really quick overview of what the CalVTP is and just a little bit of background on it. So it is, the abbreviation actually stands for the California Vegetation Treatment Program, and that's a programmatic EIR. And its process is to, well, its intent was to try and help streamline the CEQA process and get more field reduction and prescribed fire on the ground. So this is just kind of a quick, for those who know CEQA or who don't know CEQA, this is a CEQA process flowchart. And so this is what helps guide you to determine what kind of environmental document you need when performing any, sort of project. So the CalVTP's goal was to try and simplify this lovely flowchart into something more, more user-friendly. So the CalVTP was prepared by the Board of Forestry, and it was certified in December of 2019. So it's a very young document. It can be used by everyone. And it was evaluating up to 250,000 acres of treatment per year. And there are 3 different treatment types associated with it. So there's the wildland urban interface, WUI, fuel breaks, and ecological restoration. And within those 3 different focused treatment types, there's actually 5 different treatment activities that can be utilized. And so prescribed fire, and that's broken down into pile burning or broadcast burning, and then mechanical treatments, manual treatments, herbivory, and actually also looks at herbicide use. So the objectives of the CalVTP were to serve as the vegetation management component of the state's range of actions underway to try to reduce the risks of life, property, and natural resources by managing the amount of continuity of hazardous vegetative fuels that promote wildland fire, consistent with the California 2018 strategic plan. To substantially increase the pace and scale of vegetation treatments to contribute to achieving a statewide total of at least 500,000 acres per year on non-federal lands, consistent with the governor's executive order, which hopefully will help result in a target of up to 5,000 acres per year after considering other types and areas of vegetation treatments. And then also to increase the use of prescribed burning as a vegetation treatment tool, consistent with the Senate Bill 1260 and also 901, and to contribute to meeting California's greenhouse gas emission goals just by managing forests and other natural working lands as consistent with the California Forest Carbon Plan, the Climate Change Scoping Plan, and other plans that are there. And then also to improve ecosystem health and fire adapted habitats by safely mimicking the effects of natural fire regime, considering historic fire return intervals, climate change, and land use constraints. So that's a lot of information and just simplified. It just wants to serve as a management tool to reduce the risks from high vegetation fuel loads, just increase the pace and scale of fuel reduction to achieve the governor's goals of 5,000 acres per year, increase the use of prescribed burning as a vegetation management tool, and then to manage forests and working lands to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing large catastrophic wildfires, and then also improve ecosystem health by increasing fire on the landscape. So we said that the CalVTP can be utilized by all. So what that broken down into is a project proponent. So the state, that can be a state or local public agency that's providing funding for vegetation treatment or land, or they have land ownership and or management or regulatory responsibilities in the treatable landscape. This could be, so a big user of it is going to be obviously CAL FIRE. And then there's other state agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife can utilize it on their lands, state parks, cities, counties, if you're a special district, universities, water agencies, open space districts, conservancies. Those are just groups of them. It's more information within the actual programmatic EIR can be found on these pages here, which is the sections 1.5.1, and it shows you like there's a whole list of other entities that can use this document. So it's not just CAL FIRE. So the CalVTP is usable on the treatable landscape, which was analyzed by taking what's called the SRA, so the state responsibility area, and overlapping the California wildlife habitat relationships layer, which is the CWHR, and kind of overlaid those habitats within the SRA. And then we were able to come up with that treatable landscape, but they removed areas where the fire risk was lower. So areas like wet meadows and estuaries, agricultural areas. So those are the areas where they thought that those three different treatment types, the WUI, the fuel break, and the ecological restoration could be utilized the most. So the SRA is made up of 31 million acres, and the CalVTP treatable landscape can be applied to 20.3 million acres of that 31 million acres. LRA, which is the local responsibility area, can also be treated within the with the CalVTP, but you just need to have an addendum to the project specific analysis. And this is stuff that we'll dive into deeper later on in the presentation. So here's just a quick map of that treatable landscape that I was talking about. So again, that's just SRA that was overlaid with that CWHR layer, and then they removed those areas that didn't have as high of a fire risk. So there's three basic fuel types within the CalVTP. There's the grass fuel type, the shrub fuel type, and the tree fuel type. So this is just a map showing that within that treatable landscape. And then this is a map of the wildland urban interface, so the WUI treatment area. And this is just a model of where potential WUI treatments could occur. So just because it's modeled here on the treatable landscape doesn't mean that's the only place that you can utilize it. And then a map of the fuel break treatment areas. And again, it's the same thing. It's a model of it. And a map of the ecological restoration treatment area. And again, these are just models. So just a quick breakdown of the analysis within the CalVTP. So there are standard project requirements that were built into the CalVTP, and these were developed in collaboration with other agencies, and they're just helping to avoid and minimize environmental impacts, and then also help to comply with applicable laws and regulations. And they are incorporated into all of the proposed vegetation treatments within the CalVTP. So those are the WUI, the fuel break, and the ecological restoration. And they're intended to be implemented and enforced the same way as mitigation measures that are a part of CEQA. So this is just a quick look, a list of the standard project requirements and the mitigation measures that are in the CalVTP. So there are a total of 70 SPRs that need to be reviewed within the CalVTP. They all have to be reviewed. They don't all have to be implemented because not all of them will apply to your specific project. And there's a total of 21 mitigation measures within the document. And again, they all have to be evaluated, but they don't necessarily all have to be implemented. There's also posting requirements for the CalVTP as well. So per SPR 87, so that's standard project requirement administration 7, the project proponent needs to provide information to the Board of Forestry 15 days prior to your project being approved. So that's the proposed information. And this information includes just a GIS point of where your project is, how big your project is going to be, what treatment types and activities you're going to be utilizing, and an estimate on the acreage associated with them. And then just a contact information for the project proponents should the public have questions on it. There's also approved project posting requirements. So once your project has been signed and approved, you'll need to submit your final signed PSA, so project specific analysis that has your checklist and other supporting documentation to the board for posting. And then also GIS data that has a polygon of your project area, which shows just the different treatments within it. So ecological restoration, fuel break, and WUI, depending on what you have. And then there's also project information on your completed project. So once your project is done, you'll then provide that same information to the board of where you actually applied those treatments, and then a post-project report saying the acres that you treated, a breakdown of the different treatment types and what you did, and then when you worked, and then actually what SPRs and mitigation measures you implemented. And if any of them, if you weren't able to implement them fully, like an explanation as to why. So that's just a quick overview of what the CalVTP is. I'll dive into how it's applied after John's presentation.
Thank you, Shannon. Let me update this here. Hold on a second. Whose screen are we seeing here?
I think it's my screen.
Okay, good.
Sure.
Let's, okay, so John, why don't you share your screen? We're gonna hear a presentation from John about why the CalVTP is the path forward.
All right, kind of that mute button moved on me there. So here, let me pull up my presentation and we'll get started here. So I'll mute myself. Yes. Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, the CalVTP, thanks Shannon. That was a good little overview. I'm gonna kind of take us on a journey, if you will. So go with me down the road of trying to kind of get our heads wrapped around what we have in front of us from the problem, and then hopefully, you know, get to the solution, how we take steps forward to address this. So this CalVTP is relatively new, like Shannon mentioned. It was developed by the Board of Forestry. And okay, my computer, oh, there we go. Okay, so here we go. So here's the problem. The state's fire season is now almost year round. I don't think it's going to be shocking for anybody here in attendance that we have a significant fuels problem and a significant fire impact problem in our state. That's definitely the trends, and we'll take a little look at that through some graphics that our department developed. I'll share those in a minute, but I kind of want to highlight that 25 million acres of California are classified now in very high or extreme fire threat. So in that, it's 11 million people that live in this high risk area. So that is not just a few isolated communities. it's a broad spectrum of the state that is, right in the path of the next potentially devastating fire. So how do we do that? What is the path to kind of combating that and changing that, mitigating those threats? Clearly looks like work. We've got to do something. We've been on this past the historical practices, and I think everybody's probably aware of what the problem is. There's obviously a lot of different variables that go into that, but we have a significant kind of workload ahead of us. So we have to understand though, as we're going down this pathway, what our sideboards are, and I'll get into that a little bit more here. But understanding the CEQA is a big piece of that, and this CalVTP kind of is right in that. So the CalVTP, when we talk CalVTP, we are talking CEQA. It's in that flow chart that Sharon showed, and so really anybody that has that discretionary action in those public agencies, they can use this tool to approve a project and move forward on work. So that's kind of where we'll get started. So with that, kind of zooming in on the CAL FIRE aspect, there's our mission right there, is to serve and safeguard the people and protect the property and resources of California. So as California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, that is our mission to do that. And you can see in this incident response graph from 2007 to where we are last year, we've gone from responding to just under 300,000 individual incidents to responding to well over 500,000. So that trend is going up, and it's expected to go up. The workload has never been higher, and it's not expected to get easier anytime soon. So so what do we do? Again, this is just painting that picture. We've got to get a little bit better, I believe, and it's not a big stretch to say, okay, we've developed this kind of response net framework, and absolutely that is our dialed into our key objective. But part of that too is being proactive and say, hey, how do we get ahead of this curve? How do we stem the tide of the next big one, so that it's just a isolated incident and not a month-long fire siege. So we'll get into some more graphics here that kind of tell that same story. If you look at the largest, this is a picture of the largest fires that have impacted our state. You can kind of see there 1932 through 99, pretty small piece of the pie when you're talking just acreage. And then you go from 2000, 2009, that's almost double the previous 70 years. And then 2010 through 2019, you can see that trend there. And then unfortunately, the last 2 years alone, well over half of the acres burned are the largest fires. And there's that pie chart representing that. So pretty sobering. And then this chart as well, kind of showing the number of structures destroyed. So those same time periods kind of tell the story of, hey, we've got a situation here. And I think the fact that, we've had, a pretty good interest in this webinar, and kind of tells the story that, hey, people are aware of this, from just the general public to the legislature. Everybody's in support of, hey, we got to do something, let's try it. So this CalVTP that was developed by the Board of Forestry really is tackling that. So before I get into the CalVTP, let's talk a moment about, okay, how do we, what is in our arsenal of tools? What is our toolbox to kind of combat this? So we have prescribed fire. So that looks like, broadcast burning and pile burning to mitigate the fuels or eliminate the fuels. It's also mechanical treatment. So tractors, machines of various scales and types to get work done out there, to change the fuel composition, to do what we think is best as resource managers, to keep our ecosystems healthy, functional, and also our community safe. So there's the manual treatments that's similar to mechanical, but it's generally with hand crews and hand tools. And then there's the herbivory component, and then herbicide use. So that's kind of the full range of tools available to us as resource managers. And then kind of the how. So there's our tools. The how, I think we're going to stay kind of in the state lane. So that second bullet point down. So we'll engage the CEQA process, but I want to take a quick pause and say, okay, there's also the private, there's the federal, and then there's our cultural kind of counterparts. and they may or may not have a similar kind of trajectory with how they get these, utilize these tools. So CEQA is our process, and we're going to stay with that. But just understand that, okay, there's the federal, our federal folks have NEPA, and then some of the private folks, there's going to be various permits, regional to local to statewide, that they have to go through. So back to the state kind of model there, that's where we kind of find ourselves as CAL FIRE, and frankly, any other state agency or any other local municipality that is not a private, a federal, or a cultural enterprise. So, so with that, I'm going to take a little break here from just the words, and if you could go with me on a journey. So can everybody do that? This is new, this whole webinar thing, but I want to kind of paint an analogy for us as we move forward. So we're thinking about, okay, where we are, and that's all those last 3 slides with those pretty doom and gloom graphics to tell the story of, hey, we've got a problem. So that's A, and then we want to get to B. So it's like, how do we get from A to B? So that's our framework here. This is our process. So I'm gonna kind of reference our little analogy here. So stay with me as we kind of work through this. Appreciate it. It's hard to, I can't see anybody's reaction, so I don't know if people are starting to log out or not. So, so I'm going to throw this up here. That's the same flow chart. I'm going to kind of attack this incrementally because it does get wordy. CEQA is challenging to get our heads wrapped around, but here it goes. So this is a quote. This is right from the Office of Planning and Research. We'll tackle it one at a time. So the purpose is to avoid, to reduce, and prevent environmental damage. Cool. And foster an informed and transparent public decision-making process. Awesome. By providing information to decision makers and to the public concerning the environmental effects, great, of projects either undertaken or approved by these lead agencies. So that's CEQA. Cool, I like it. So it requires state and local agencies to inform those decision makers of the environmental impacts that are proposed and how to reduce those impacts. So cool. All right. So on our journey here, think of, we got A to B. We've got the process of CEQA. So that will be our road, how we get there. And then how we travel down that road, that is this CalVTP. That is the engine that's going to carry us along the road, which is the process from A to B, and stay, in bounds, not get off track, but stay within the proper channels of making sure we're not doing more damage than we're doing good, and get progress done. So the CalVTP is a programmatic EIR, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The programmatic piece of the EIR means that the work has already been done on the analysis side. So staying consistent with that analysis that the Board of Forestry has already done, projects are able to be streamlined through the review process. If by going through those specific analysis pieces, you are able to stay consistent with that, or you find your findings are that, hey, we're consistent with the analysis that's already been taking place in this programmatic, which is that vehicle, right? Our vehicle traveling down that road of CEQA from A to B, then we're streamlining processes. So breaking it down right there in the kind of the darker center point there, this is the CalVTP. We're treating grass, trees, and shrubs. We're doing 3 different treatment types. This is all inclusive in our vehicle. The WUI, the fuel breaks, the ecological restoration. So that's our treatment types. And then there's our 5 activities covered. So you'll notice that's the full toolkit available to us inside, wrapped in this nice little vehicle to get from A to B along the CEQA road. So I'll take a step further, understand that with CEQA from A to B, depending on what your road is and where your A and where your B is, you may not need a fancy new SUV. I'm calling this CalVTP. Think of it as a fancy SUV that's shiny right out of the lot, hybrid, latest technology. It's got the latest analysis. So by going through this, we've got a pretty strong engine to carry us along the road. But understand, you might just be at a golf course level, and to get from A to B, you need a golf cart. And so that would be the exemption. I'm dumbing it down mostly for myself, but that's how I like to think through these things. So you're not going to use a golf cart to get from one end of the state to the next end of the state, or you're not going to use a golf cart to go over a mountain pass. You're going to need some more horsepower. You're going to need some more analysis run. That's where this CalVTP, this programmatic analysis that's already taken place, if you use this engine, this vehicle, that's going to provide a lot of utility to get this work done. So still going to be work. There's still going to be a lot of things under the hood. And I'm going to, that's going to be Shannon. She's going to go through a little bit more of what those details are, what those analysis are to get things kind of in place so you can really have a cohesive plan utilizing this programmatic language and this programmatic document to go from A down the CEQA path to B, which is, your completed fuels treatment projects, whether you're focusing on the WUI interface, whether you're focusing on the fuel break portion, both shaded and unshaded, or ecological restoration, which could look, we all know there's a lot of very unique special ecosystems in our state that are worth fighting for. And so that end result could look different. So that's kind of the context I like to think about it. It helped me as I was kind of processing through, okay, what's this programmatic stuff? What's CEQA? When is it appropriate for an exemption, a categorical exemption? So all that works together, and this CalVTP that was developed by the Board of Forestry really solves that puzzle for, hey, if we stay consistent with this, follow the plan, follow these project-specific analysis, go through the steps that are listed there, you have some streamline and some efficiency for getting projects approved. And it makes the process for making that decisions or those decision makers that much easier so that projects can get approved and work can get done. So I don't want to belabor that any more than necessary, but there it is again. We streamline stuff by having by utilizing the analysis that's already been done and putting that to work on a project specific level. So where does that leave us? I'm going to tie it back, okay, if you will, with me. Open that door of our new fancy vehicle, our new CalVTP vehicle. We'll step inside and we'll go for a little ride as we kind of apply this to some real world charges that we are put in. So us as CAL FIRE and us as state, Senate Bill 456 kind of establishes that Forest Resilience Task Force. It's a wildfire and forest resilience task force, and they developed a action plan that has some specific goals targeting this problem to hopefully, bring a lot of the players to the table so we can kind of work collaboratively to answer these challenges. So there's links to the website there. I'm going to go through these four goals through the lens of our CalVTP as we kind of see, hey, how this can apply to those 4 goals that are established. So on your own time, I definitely encourage you to take a look at this this task force and then also their action plan. It's pretty cool stuff, definitely cutting edge, kind of where the tip of the spear is as kind of legislature and more that broad level, Sacramento level of, hey, how are we answering the call that's being put on not just CAL FIRE, but the state as a whole in the midst of kind of unprecedented drought, climate change, wildfires, accumulation of fuel, you name it. So our current situation. So goal 1 of the action plan is to increase the pace and scale of forest health projects. So through the lens of the CalVTP, that's what the CalVTP is. It's to help streamline projects, to help get projects off the ground. So we got all fuel types. We've got a very kind of ability for treatment objectives. So there's the WUI, there's your, your fuel breaks, there's your ecological restoration, which all kind of work together, right, for healthy, resilient systems. Obviously, we're going to have strategic locations where we may hold a fire, and that's your fuel break, or have resources engage a fire safely. Those are your fuel breaks. We're going to have healthy systems in general, have a higher threshold when it comes to wildfire. Fire is actually a key ecological component. So having healthy systems will allow fire to kind of remain as a part of that system and just betters all of us, because that's kind of returning it to the ground. So I don't want to belabor this any longer than I have to. I know that I'm probably speaking to the choir on a lot of this, but really to solve goal 1, the CalVTP is going to be an invaluable tool, both for CAL FIRE, as Shannon mentioned, but also for other agencies as well, from parks, state parks, to State Fish and Wildlife Service, to any other project proponent that might be kind of spearheading a project. Goal 2 is to strengthen protection of communities. So again, with those 3 treatment objectives, 3 treatment fuel types, there they are right there. That's what this CalVTP is designed for. So you can really get a picture now as we're starting to look at these goals through the lens of the CalVTP, how applicable this new tool can be to solving, to getting us from our point A to our point B, wherever that point B might look like for that situation. And then goal 3, to manage forests to achieve the state's economic and environmental goals. So again, that a key part of this is that ecological restoration and returning our ecosystems back to their healthy, resilient kind of origins. And so what that looks like in the midst of climate change and changing ecosystems is still open. It's on the table. That discussions is out there as you work through the analysis of this. And different, CEQA is not cut and dry. It's not a black and white. It's a process. It's, if you look at that flow chart, A leads to B leads to C, and you engage the public. You have decision makers. You go to your counterpart agencies. You get cross-disciplinary goals so that at the end of the day, the public can rest assured saying, hey, due diligence was done, and the benefits are gonna outweigh the potential negative impacts, which I think everybody can get behind. So the 4th and final goal is to drive innovative and measured success. So really, everybody I think is on the same page of, hey, we got to go for it. We got to try it. Now's the time. We've gotten behind the curve, and so now we need to kind of keep the pedal on the foot on the gas pedal and keep moving down that road. So what's that going to look like? To me, to go with our analogy, it's going to be a lot of different projects zooming down the highway from A to B, utilizing the CalVTP to get this work done. So it's not just going to be one project. There really is no silver bullet. CalVTP is not a silver bullet, because there might be a situation where you might go with the categorical exemption, or you might go another CEQA compliant route that makes sense and is appropriate for that situation. But the CalVTP will be an invaluable tool to move us down the CEQA process, which is our highway, from point A, which is where we are, to point B, which is where we want to go. And with that, that's kind of my whole spiel here, was saying, hey, let's do it, let's use it. So I think there's some folks I know on this call that have already gone through the process of putting together projects and gone through these analysis components to so they can kind of, there's resources out there, is what I'm saying. People who have, this has been out there kind of now a couple years, and as this gets traction and people start to realize, hey, the utility and the value of this kind of streamlined process, I think that, hopefully it just blows the lid off the top of this, and that more people get involved and say, hey, this is something we can do. This is something we can do, and actually it's something we should do. So with that, I'll probably turn it back to Marisha.
Thank you, John. I like your vehicle analogy here. We are getting a couple questions in the Q&A. That's great. We're going to hold them to the end, so please don't hesitate to enter your Q&A questions on there. And now I'm going to pass it back to Shannon for a discussion on how and where the CalVTP can be applied.
Okay, and John has stopped sharing his screen, and then I'll share my screen. Okay.
All the fun Zoom things.
I know. And then so many screens too. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that.
Not yet, Shannon.
Now.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to give an overview on how the CalVTP can actually be applied. So bear with me on this one. So you'll have seen some of these slides in my other presentation. So again, the CalVTP, developed in, approved in 2019 at the end of the year. It evaluated for treating up to 250,000 acres. It's used by all as underlined because previously the department had another vegetation management program that we utilized that was specific to us. So this is why it can be used by everyone. And we kind of emphasize that point. So there are the 3 different treatment types within the CalVTP tools that John mentioned. So those are the wildland interface, fuel breaks, and ecological restoration, and then the 5 treatment activities associated with those treatment types. Again, this is just the program objectives simplified of what the goal of the CalVTP is. And then the area that you can treat or use those tools on within the CalVTP. So that's the treatable landscape. Again, that's the SRA. And so here's that map of that. And that was the SRA that was overlaid with the different California wildlife habitat relationships. And then the removal of fuels that weren't as high, didn't have as high of a likelihood for fire. So wet meadows, estuaries, and the ag lands. And then it was simplified down into 3 different fuel types. So there's the grass, the brush, and the tree. So these are the different treatment types within the VTP, and then the associated treatment activities. So here is the wildland urban interface. So these are generally located in and around the communities that are within the wildland. So the goal of them is to prevent or slow the spread of non-wind driven wildfires between structures and wildlands. And again, this is a model of it. So just because it's shown here on the map doesn't mean that's the only place that it can be done within the treatable landscape. As long as within the treatable landscape, you can generally utilize the WUI anywhere. And then there's the fuel break treatment areas. So these are more strategic locations because fuel breaks are generally a horizontal removal of fuels. So they want to create a linear layer so that our firefighters can go out and provide suppression efforts to help slow or reduce the spread of fires. Again, this is just a model of those areas. So they generally looked at ridge tops and roadsides, but depending upon the area you're trying to protect, it could be put in various locations. So as long, again, as it's within that treatable landscape, you can apply those fuel break treatment areas in multiple locations. And then there's the ecological restoration treatment. So this is usually outside of the WUI, and these are areas where they've departed from that natural fire regime as a result of the fire exclusion. So the goal of this is to focus on restoring that ecosystem process and resiliency by bringing fire back into that landscape. And they're also trying to recreate those historic, vegetation compositions and habitat values. So again, this is one where the modeling is probably more appropriate for the representation of it, but again, it doesn't necessarily have to fall within those areas. So you have your 3 different treatment types. And within those 3 different treatment types, there are specific treatment activities that you can do. So when you're developing your project, your 3 different treatment types shouldn't overlap. They should be a distinct treatment type. And then within those treatment types, you can have treatment activities. And these treatment activities can overlap within those areas because you might need to do some mechanical treatments before you can safely go in and actually do a broadcast burn. So these 5 different treatment activities, this is laid out in table 2.3 of the programmatic MEIR. So there's prescribed burning, which is broken down into pile burning and broadcast burning. There's the mechanical treatment. So as John mentioned, that's more motorized equipment to try to reduce that fuel loading of the existing vegetation. There's the manual treatment. So that's more hand tools to remove those fuels. There's the prescribed herbivory. So goats, cows, sheep to modify those fuels. And then there's herbicide use that's also could be used to target the treatments. And there's a list within the ER of those herbicides that can be utilized. Also, within the CalVTP is an ecoregions. So these ecoregions were modeled within that treatable landscape. These are based on the U.S. Forest Service ecological sections. There is an appendix within the CalVTP. It's Appendix Bio 3 that has a list of associated plant and animal species that have the potential to be within that habitat. So for a lot of projects, for those that are CEQA practitioners, you generally used to looking at CNPS lists or looking at a CNDDB query. And the CNDDB is great, but it doesn't show, it's not a, if it's not there, it's not there. It's a presence only. So when you're doing your analysis, having this ecoregion list allows you to look at all of the potential species that are potentially within your project and making sure you're doing an analysis on them as well to make sure you're not having any impacts to them. So this is one of the ecoregion lists. I apologize that the text is so small, but so each one of them has an associated table again that's broken up into plant and then animal, and then there's also other tables for the fish and special habitats. So I mentioned before that there is the standard project requirements, which are SPRs that were built into the CalVTP. So these were compiled with other agencies to help reduce any impacts and then also to comply with applicable laws and regulations, trying to help streamline that process, that CEQA process. So the standard project requirements, again, are intended to be implemented and enforced the same way as mitigation measures when complying with CEQA. So there's 70 SPRs that need to be looked at when analyzing your project. And not all of them need to be applied, may not apply to your project, but all of them need to be looked at. And so this is just a list of each one that's associated with the different impacts. And then also the mitigation measures. So the SPRs are listed like maybe 1 through 7, 1 through 8, 1 through 9, and they're individual. The mitigation measures are actually linked back to that specific impact that they were doing an analysis for. So they're not listed 1 through 3 or 1 through 5. So when you're looking at them, some people get a little confused that, well, it says AES 3, what happened to AES 1 and 2? Well, the mitigation measure there were no mitigation measures associated with the aesthetics for impact 1 or impact 2. So that just a quick explanation on that. So when you're developing your CalVTP project, you want to make sure that your project plan is developed based on, the landowner's objectives, and then also getting input from other agencies or groups that have, potential environmental concerns, just to make sure that everyone is everyone has an opportunity just to kind of give their thoughts, and making sure that species aren't being impacted, or special habitats aren't being impacted. So once you developed your plan, which kind of John laid out a little bit, you're going to take all of that information and you're going to put it into what's called a project specific analysis. And then you're going to discuss the applicable SPRs and mitigation measures, and then also develop what's called a mitigation and monitoring reporting program, which most people, if you're familiar with CEQA and developing other mitigated neg decks or an environmental impact report, that's a part of that. And then you would submit that information to the Board of Forestry per that SPR 87. And again, that SPR 87 is the reporting requirements. So there's, you have to provide information to the board 15 days prior to the project being approved. It's generally good to do it as soon as you have an idea of what your project design and your acres are, versus just waiting until the actual 15 days before. And then there's the information that needs to be provided after the project is approved. So again, that's your approved PSA with the completed mitigation monitoring reporting program, and then a GIS layer of all of your actual project area, and then your treatment types, not your treatment activities, just your treatment types. And then once your project is done, you would submit information again on what was actually treated. So you have once it's approved, what you're planning on doing, and then once it's been treated, what you actually did, and then what days you worked, what SPRs and MMs that you implemented, and then any ones that had any extra reporting requirements to them. So your project specific analysis. So when you're doing developing your project and you're gathering all this information on what your location is, what your different habitat site are present, what your vegetation is made up of, if you have any water courses present, sensitive communities nearby, what your treatment activities are, or the treatment types are. Any consultations that you had to do, and the SPRs and mitigation measures that you implemented. All of that information is going into this project specific analysis. So on the Board of Forestry's website, there is a sample project specific analysis that you can utilize. That's what this is. So this is where you're going to put all of that information in. And so as you can see, the title, who the project proponent is, so who's completing the work, a good contact information for that, where it is, how many acres you're anticipating to treat, a description of your project, the different treatment types, breakdowns of acreages of the different treatment activities, and then also what fuel types you're going to be working in. And that's also important, delineating what treatment types and treatment activities that you're doing, because the SPRs apply to certain treatment types and treatment activities. I should have said that earlier. I apologize. And then also a breakdown of how you're going to maintain this after you do your initial treatment, and what you're going to be utilizing to maintain it is in this document as well. Makes you think about, the long-term goals of it. So this is the actual project specific analysis, and looking at the different impacts. So when you're looking at your project and you're trying to assess whether or not you're going to have any impacts to, so this is for aesthetics and visual resources. So specific to your project you're going to look at the first impact for AES. So could the project result in short-term substantial degradation of a scenic vista or visual character or quality of public views or damage to scenic resources and a state scenic highway from treatment activities? So for the whole EIR, that's what that next column is. Identify impact significance in the EIR. So based on the whole EIR, they said it was going to be less than significant. And the specific analysis related to that in the EIR is in Impact AES1 on pages 3.2, 16 to 19. So this tells you where you can go to look at that specific analysis that you can then compare your smaller project to in regards to this PEIR. So if you have a project that is along a visual view, so if you have a scenic highway or a road nearby, does the impact apply to the treatment project? So these are drop-down boxes. So you would click on it and then you would say, yes, it does apply. And then you would list the SPRs that are applicable to the treatment project. So when you go into the actual analysis of it, there's SPRs and mitigation measures that are applicable to that impact. So then you would list those there if they apply. And then the same thing for the mitigation measures, that next column, you would list the mitigation measures that apply to that impact. And then you need to identify the impact significance for the treatment of the project. The impact significance should be equal to or less than what was identified in the whole PEIR. If you have an impact that is greater than what was analyzed in the PEIR, you should probably look at your project design and see if there's a way that you can modify that to make a less significant impact, or you'll probably have to have more supplemental environmental documentation to address that. And there'll be a flow chart that will show you a little bit later on that. So the next question is, would this be a substantially more severe significant impact than identified in the PEIR? And generally that should be no. And then is this impact within the scope of the PEIR? And that should be yes. So as long as your project is within the scope of the PEIR and your impacts aren't greater, this is the document that you should be utilizing. And that's where John was kind of talking about the different CEQA approaches and the different documents that are available. So for your whole small project area, you need to look at every single impact that was analyzed within the PEIR and say whether or not it's applicable. And then you'll also dive into the SPRs. So that's what this is. So this is standard project requirements. And again, this is in that template that's available on the Board of Forestry's website. And so this goes through every SPR that's within the PEIR, and then you just say whether or not it's applicable to your project. So it breaks it down into the initial treatment and the treatment maintenance. And then when you're planning on applying that SPR, so is it prior to implementation? Would it be something that you're doing during implementation or after implementation? Who is implementing it? And then who's going to verify and monitor it? And then the same thing happens for the mitigation measures. And again, not all of them will necessarily apply to your project, but all of them need to be looked at. So this is that breakdown where I was saying, if all of your impacts are within the scope of the project specific or within the PEIR, then you can use this project specific analysis and then get your project approved. And so depending upon what your agency's environmental review processes is, That's how you're going to do that. It's not approved by the board. It's not approved by CAL FIRE. It is approved by your regulatory entity. And then you would submit that to the board for that posting for the approved projects. So this is a flow chart of that. So if you have an impact that, you know, has a higher, more severe analysis than what was originally analyzed, then this is where you would either file a negative declaration, a mitigated negative declaration, or an EIR. Most of the time, I haven't yet seen any that have required any additional documents. Usually, if you have something that's that severe outside of it, you're probably going to go with a different environmental compliance route. So once you've done your whole analysis and you've gotten your project approved, you're going to move on to project implementation. So prior to commencing your treatments, you want to make sure that you read through those applicable SPRs and mitigation measures to make sure that you are making proper notifications to either other agencies or posting signs or to the communities before you start work. And then you'll hopefully conduct your project successfully. And then you will compile a post-project implementation report and submit it to the board along with the GIS data of where your project was actually completed. So that's a lot of information, and I know there's a lot of people are like, well, how is this actually more of a streamlined document than other CEQA documents? So we're just going to take a quick look at some other options. And I know there was a question on when you would use a golf cart versus an SUV in John's analogy. So a golf cart, notice of exemption. So notices of exemption are broken down into statutory exemptions and then categorical exemptions. Statutory exemptions are already kind of granted by legislature. They're ministerial projects. In the case of CAL FIRE, it's usually when there's an emergency. So that's when a statutory exemption would apply to us for when we're actually going out and doing our responses to wildland fires. No CEQA document required. We just go out and do. And then there's categorical exemptions. So there's 33 different classes of these. Based on the type of project you're doing, they are assume that you're not going to have a significant effect on the environment, and you're not. There's no exceptions that apply that would preclude its use. So if it's by a state, a designated scenic highway, or by a hazardous waste site, those are some of those exceptions. Usually these projects are smaller. They don't have a significant effect on the environment, either because there's no, cultural resources nearby. They don't have any potentially rare, threatened, endangered species that you would have an impact on smaller scale projects. So there's a negative and mitigated negative declaration. So these documents are utilized when you potentially could have an impact and you need to have a mitigation to prevent an impact from occurring. So these can be smaller scale because you might have some significant cultural resources within your project. You have a species that you're trying to protect. You're near a view shed that you're trying not to have an impact on. So those are just some small things. And then there's an environmental impact report. So these are generally a lot larger scale projects than the mitigated neg deck or notice of exemption. The CalVTP, it covers the whole of California. So this is a programmatic environmental impact report. These can be used for property-wide managements. Timberland conversions sometimes utilize these when you're doing large construction sites. These usually require environmental impact reports. So again, this is the process for CEQA and that flow chart. So this just kind of helps you, guides you through. And so by utilizing this PEIR, you already have mitigations built into it. You have treatments and activities that are built into it. You're working through your notifications with those other agencies. It's already built into that document. So you're not having to, utilize this flow chart and try and make these decisions. It's kind of built into it for you. So there are pros and cons of the CalVTP. So some of the pros, that there are mitigations built into the PEIR. So you don't have to come up with them when you're developing your project. There's no true public comment period for the CalVTP. It's there, that 15-day window does give the public an opportunity to voice their concerns, but it's not a true public comment period. And there's no Fish and Wildlife filing fee. So when you're filing a negative declaration, mitigated negative declaration, or an environmental impact report, there's a filing fee that's associated with that. This PEIR has already paid that. So you're just doing a project tiered off of it, and you don't have to pay that fee. So that saves you money and gives you an opportunity to put it into actual project implementation. And then CEQA compliance is built into the process, and working with your other agencies is also, built into this process. So the water quality waste discharge permit, it's automatic enrollment, and they will notify you and provide you with a letter and letting you know that you've been enrolled, and that process is done. So some of the cons could be that there are mitigations built into this PEIR, and it might make it so that something that you had intended to do, you can't necessarily do because the mitigation doesn't allow for it. It's only designed for the state responsibility area, and you would have to have an addendum to do stuff on the local responsibility area. It's not a difficult process. It's built into that form. It's easy to do, but it is an additional work. It is not available for the federal responsibility area because that's NEPA. So it's a different environmental review process. And then you also cannot use it for timber harvest because that's also a different process, and that falls under our, the forest practice rules. In talking with different users of the CalVTP outside of CAL FIRE, I've heard that those that are already CEQA practitioners have been doing it for a while. They feel that it's a large document, but it's relatively easy to follow. And once you've done it once, it makes it easier to do additional ones. So these are links to the Board of Forestry's website, and I can either take you there now to show you where you can find all this information, or we can move into some of the questions. Risha, how would you like me to proceed?
Great question. Thank you so much, Shannon. There are some really great questions in the chat. So I'm thinking maybe we'll shift to that and then go from there, because we do have some time for questions, thankfully. Yeah. Gray, would you like to step in here? Oh.
I would gladly step in. I think the best way to start this is to ask, and I'm going to manage this tool here. Ellie, you've asked several questions, and I'd like to allow you to just ask them in real time if you're willing. Let's see if you're willing. Sorry to put you on the spot, Ellie. Do you want to ask these firsthand? You're allowed to talk now.
Oh, okay. Sure. Let's see. The questions I had, well, there's two, I think, that are connected. Does the Board of Forestry ever disapprove of a project within the 15 days, is it the Board of Forestry that's approving or disapproving or even reviewing, or is that just a 15-day not public comment when the public can comment, which I think is an interesting way to describe it. But, and if the land manager has a crew and equipment all lined up, and then there's the project is just denied, that could be a significant problem. And then an associated question is, what level of actual oversight is there to make sure the projects are compliant with the implementation and monitoring requirements?
I can answer the first one. The Board of Forestry they're not reviewing and approving them. That's for the project proponent to do. The only time that in working with them that we have not posted a project for the proposed project period is because it was just missing information. So we do require acreages for the different treatment activities. And I know that there are some entities that they just don't know how many acres they're going to treat by pile burning, because that's a hard number to calculate, or that what they're going to use post-treatment for herbicide use. It's just an estimate. So those are the only times we haven't posted stuff, is because we just need additional information.
Does that get at your questions, Ellie?
Yeah, I think it's just interesting that then the project proponent has a pretty much leeway in determining the gist themselves, which is partly why I asked the second question: what level of actual oversight is there to make sure the projects are compliant with compliant and then monitored. I've done a lot of restoration work, and I mean, I know that there's just so many hundreds of thousands of acres out there that I'm just curious about how much monitoring and oversight there is.
So that's why it's not everyone. So like a fire safe council, they cannot be a project proponent. They have to go through another entity to actually review and approve the document. So that's why I showed on the beginning of it who can actually sign and approve the documents. And that's their role as a responsible agency. And they would be the ones who are reviewing to make sure that it complies with their agency's guidelines and their regulatory review process. And then in that SPR and mitigation checklist, there is who is responsible for verifying and monitoring those specific ones as well. And that would be added into when the project is complete, who actually did that. So that whoever was identified in the document should be the ones who are actually going out and making sure that they're following what they said they were going to do.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I actually had to jump off for about 5 minutes when you were talking about that. So that really does make a lot of sense. Should I ask my other question?
Go for it. Sure.
So at one point, Shannon said that for non-wind driven fires, and since many of the devastating fires have been wind driven, will the treatments be helpful also for wind driven fires? And I think I know the answer to that, but I just think that I do a lot of education for, landowners and the general public. And this whole thing about non-wind driven versus wind driven, it just seems so important to be able to describe. So anything you say will help me when I talk about it.
Yeah. And that's, we just don't, when you're putting in a fuel break, don't want to give the false sense that it's always going to stop a fire. And that's always going to be the best place for us to defend it. Because there are instances, when we've had 60, 70, 100 mile an hour winds, and they are going to push through those. So we just want to make sure people understand the differences between them in wind-driven and non-wind-driven fire events.
Yep, and I could chime in a little bit on that. I've been on the ground on ridge lines where we've had just massive fire lines, and like, oh, we've got a fighting chance. And then, you know, there's long range spotting up to a mile away. And so, like Shannon said, the fact that you have a fuel break in place isn't hard and fast. Oh, we've got a defensible spot. It's a good tool. It's a strategy, and that can typically be used, you know, if those conditions are right. But a wind-driven event is just a challenging thing, and to kind of not paint that false narrative that, hey, this town is now secure. This portion of line is now secured because there's a fuel break. I think is an important distinction. Conversely, you know, I've seen where just a mid-slope road on a very thick and overgrown road has been a great fire break, just because we have those conditions in the moment, and we're able to utilize that tool. So the wind-driven piece of the fuel break, I think, is just kind of to kind of tell that story, to say, hey, yeah, we've got the fuel break. This is best laid plans. This is our due diligence, but knowing full well, okay, when we do have those phone winds that ramp up, we're going to still be exploring a lot of options, plan A, plan B, plan C kind of thing.
Thank you.
If I may, I've heard other CAL FIRE, wildfire in California veterans, it's explain a shaded fuel break or some of these treatments as a seatbelt when you're driving in your car. Not to keep bringing the vehicle analogy back, John,
I like it.
but you know, like a seatbelt's going to help you in a lot of circumstances, but
Yeah.
it's not going to help you in a catastrophic, those rare, awful, catastrophic ones.
Yeah, that's a good point. My first exposure to CAL FIRE, so I mentioned I came to CAL FIRE in 2018. I came down from Oregon to fight, to kind of put my hat in the ring for the LNU fire, so the Tubbs and the Nunn fire. And that was my first exposure. Met some other folks and said, yeah, I want to come back home and kind of be part of this community to help the cause, essentially, and do my small part to make a stand for California and our awesome resources we have here. So to have those fuel breaks in place are critical, but as you scout lines, as you walk up and down those ridge lines, say, hey, where are we going to actually contain this thing so it doesn't get into the next community? Having options is amazing. Be like, hey, we've already got this spot developed. We know about it. It's obviously it's going to be on the radar of the local unit. It's going to be on the radar of the fire team that comes in. And so, yeah, I like that analogy of the seatbelt, because it's just tools and assets to kind of be a help versus just getting more stimulus all coming in. That's all negative. So the more beneficial pieces of information and opportunities that are out there, I think the more willing we are, able we are to kind of take advantage of those shifts, or when the wind does die down, say it does die down, we can go in and use it as well. So yeah, I like it.
Thanks, Ellie, for your series of questions, which I think related to other questions in the Q&A box. I understand there's some hands raised. If at all you could put your questions in the Q&A box, that's easier for us. We'll see what we can get around to. There's probably a manageable number of questions given our timeline. Another person who has several relevant questions to others is Tracy Klein. Tracy, I'm going to take you off mute, and please introduce yourself and who you work with, and then fire away with your good questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tracy Klein. I'm with Clear Lake Environmental Research Center up in Lake County, and we are a nonprofit organization that's working closely with CAL FIRE, fire safe councils, county risk reduction authorities, and several partners to try to implement some forest resilience and fire safety type projects throughout the county. 80% of our county has burned in the last 6-7 years. And so and we have a massive die-off happening right now due to bark beetles. So this is all very timely for us. But we have kind of been in the forefront of trying to implement these types of projects. We do have some CAL FIRE grants that we're utilizing. And, you know, as these things tend to do when they unfold, that things change quite a bit. So we're just trying to figure out the best path forward for implementing some of these projects. And understanding the VTP is really important for us in that regard. But with that being said, I do have some questions that I'm hoping you guys can help us answer or point us in the right direction at least. The first question I have is, can we utilize CAL FIRE grant funding to implement VTP projects? And if so, who is the lead agency? The grant requires there to be a state clearinghouse number for these projects. Would that state clearinghouse number be the EIR, or would there be a separate state clearinghouse number for each project that we're implementing? And who would that entity be? We've had some discussions with the county who basically feel that their role is outside this natural resource management role. And because they aren't typically going to be issuing any permits, like use permits, to do the work, that they don't necessarily feel like they would be the appropriate agency to implement these or to process them through the CEQA process. I would love to hear if you could give us some insights on how other places are doing it with those types of limitations. And then just give, and I'm sorry, I kind of missed this. I had a phone call, but I'm still also trying to understand exactly like who would be reviewing our projects and approving them.
I have most of your answers.
Okay, great.
Okay, so if you have a CAL FIRE fire prevention grant or a forest health grant, then yes, you can utilize this document. You can, for the CalVTP, you would utilize the state clearinghouse number associated with the VTP. All of the notices of determination for each individual project actually get filed underneath this specific PEIR at the state clearinghouse's website.
Okay.
If you do not have, like, if you are not a government entity, and it sounds like you're working with a fire safe council, CAL FIRE can be the lead for you for your fire prevention grant and your CEQA. You just need to work with your unit, so your Sonoma Lake Napa unit, and I believe that's Tim Montgomery, and make sure you're working closely with him and letting him know that this is the route that you'll be taking, and because you cannot be your own lead and the county isn't necessarily willing to be the lead agency, we'll help you move through the process. We will provide you with our project specific analysis template that he will help you fill out. You would go through our review process. So it would come through me, and I would make sure that it follows all of our procedures and is in that your treatments actually match what you have written within your grant as well. And then we would help get it posted to the board's website for you once completed. And we've done that for other grantees as well. So it's not anything new for us.
Excellent, thank you. I do have a couple more follow-up questions about the CEQA compliance side of things. I realized the EIR was done. I have not read the whole thing. But one thing that we are seeing with some of our grants is that there's a requirement for ARC records pull and ARC surveys and botanical surveys, spotted owl surveys. I'm just curious if these activities would also be required under the VTP?
Yes, okay. Especially if CAL FIRE is going to be the lead, then we have our we have specific processes that we follow for the records checks. If there's a few more details for that as well, which we can, working with Tim, we can sidebar with you to see who you have within your group, if anyone has gone through like our training course, or whether or not we would need to have you contract out with a consultant to make sure that all of that is done ahead of time.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question. I noticed it said that it can't be applied to timber harvest, but clarifying question, I'm just curious, does that include thinning of small diameter trees and overstock stands?
So it ties into the buy barter trade. So if it's something where a timber harvest document would be required, then you would have to follow the forest practice rules for that. But if there's no buy barter trade and it's just going to be, they'll be piled, burned, mulched, taken to biomass, then you could utilize some of those treatments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This has been very helpful.
Thanks, Tracy, for so many great questions. I appreciate it. I'm going to read one of the questions from Graham Meese, who works for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Graham is wondering where people might get help preparing a PSA document if they have questions or need some assistance during that process.
So this might be a good time for me to like jump over to the board's website, and I can walk you through where all of the stuff is, but there's an email account that you can send questions to, and they can direct you to the appropriate places. And then there's also like a frequently asked questions document on the board's website.
Great. Did you want to show where that is? With a share screen, or?
Yeah, I can do that really quick. I can just walk you guys because this might help answer some other questions that people.
And while you're navigating that way, I saw John's hand up a few minutes ago. John, did you have something else you wanted to add to that last series of questions?
Yeah, no, those were great questions. I think the only thing I was going to add is you can think of this as that CEQA pathway as you're traveling down that. So a good question is, who has that discretionary ability to make that discretionary decision in the CEQA process? And that's going to be kind of telling on where and how the lead agency is determined. So in your situation, we were just talking about, like Shannon said, if the county's uncomfortable, I think this is in CAL FIRE's wheelhouse to do this kind of work, and we're excited to engage in these projects. So reaching out to your local unit contacts, and just a Tim Holiday would be the LNU or the Sonoma Lake Napa contact. And yep, and then if all else fails, you can always reach out past the LNU up to the region and then into Sacramento, where Shannon and I are.
I knew it was a Tim. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is the Board of Forestry's website. So that's bof.fire.ca.gov. And so you'll go to projects and programs, and then to CalVTP. And then this is where everything related to the CalVTP lives. So this is the homepage, and then it breaks it down into where you can find information specific to the programmatic EIR. So this is where those different appendices that I was talking to you about are. And so like the Bio 3, where the different ecoregions are, that's where this Appendix Bio 3, special status species tables that you would want to look at. And there was a question regarding whether or not you would still want to utilize the CNDDB with these tables. And my response would be yes, because that will tell you if there's any known occurrences for some of these species in or around your project area that you should be aware of. Because these won't tell you that. This only tells you what has the potential of being there. And and then also has the whole environmental impact report. And then each impact has its section broken out so that you can actually click on it and look at the analysis that went into it, those specific SPRs and mitigation measures associated with it. It just breaks the document out really well for the general public. So going back again, this is that main homepage. There's the how to use the CalVTP. So this is where that project specific analysis template is. And I apologize, there aren't any drop-down boxes in it. It just, my version says that there are, but you have to type your responses of yes, no into it. So this is that PSA template that I was talking about. It's also in the appendix. You can utilize that. Those lovely flow charts that were in John and I's presentation are available here. The mitigation and monitoring program, reporting program is here. A list of fish and wildlife contacts to reach out to for your VTP projects, for doing some notifications is here. And then also there's the frequently asked questions that's here. So Ascent did a training, I believe this time last year, when the VTP actually, a year after the VTP had rolled out. And so questions from that presentation are here. They also had a slideshow or a PowerPoint, and so that's available on here. There's some example PSAs that have been done that you can click on and look at and utilize as reference documents. So here are those YouTube and a PDF of that training that occurred last year. And then just more examples. So when you go back to see, and you can click to go to the home page, and then it'll take you back to where we were before. And then this is the actual database. So this is where the viewer is for the treatable landscape. So you can click on that, and I won't do that to you because it'll take you into an ArcView map, and then you can zoom into where your project is and then see if the treatable landscape, how much of it encompasses your project area. There's a viewer for the proposed projects. So these are just little points all over the map telling you where proposed projects are and the different treatment types they're proposing and activities associated with it. And then there's a separate viewer for approved and completed projects for the CalVTP. So those are those larger polygons that are going to show where those specific treatments are. And then there's another page that has all of the environmental documentation. So these are all the currently approved CalVTPs that have been developed. There's RCDs that have submitted projects, CAL FIRE. There's, I believe, also the Coastal Conservancy has submitted projects. So there's a wide group that has been utilizing this. This is a good reference as well that you can go into and just make sure, like, oh, well, this is a similar treatment that I'm trying to address. How did they address this impact? And you can go in and look at their environmental documentation for it. And then at the bottom of all of the pages, so questions, comments, there's this CalVTP at boardofforestry.ca.gov. So bof.ca.gov. You can send your questions there and they will route them to the appropriate people or answer them themselves. And then all of your approved and proposed, approved and completed projects, go to CalVTP projects at fire.ca.gov. So it's a really good reference to use. And then here's another frequently asked questions from when it was first developed. So it's a good place, and that's in the presentation that I had, and those links are embedded in there. So you guys can just click on those and it'll take you to those pages.
Thanks, Shannon. And thanks, Graham, for the question. I think that's super helpful. Well, I'll also read another question from A. Kelly 2. How does the CalVTP address cumulative impacts?
You should be looking at the cumulative impacts for projects within your area and how your project will either hopefully not increase, but will play a role in them. That should be written into the discussion on the individual impacts, which I didn't show that. Underneath each drop box of the impacts, there's an area for you to have an actual discussion on the specific impact as well. So it should be addressed in there.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'm wondering if Abigail Whitaker would be willing. I'm gonna take Abigail off of mute. And Abigail, you had a couple of good questions. I'm hoping you don't mind asking them in real time here.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
You can, yes.
Okay, great. Always a joy when the mic actually works the first time. So I work for a land trust here in Northern California. We have a 600-acre preserve that we own in fee title that we're looking at doing the ecosystem restoration kind of option through the CalVTP on. And I had a couple of logistic questions. Firstly, would we be able to include salvage logging of insect damaged timber as part of that ecosystem restoration, or is that considered timber harvest and therefore that couldn't be part of the project?
Yep, I can answer that one. So that would be considered part of timber harvesting. So it does depend on what stage that's at. So there's that caveat in the Forest Practice Act. So anything for commercial purposes, sell, barter, or a conversion, even for that matter, anything that's considered commercial would fall under the forest practice rules and not be eligible under the CalVTP.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And my second question is just in terms of timing, we would be looking at applying for grant funding to implement the projects that we're describing under the CalVTP. And I'm just wondering if our best route would be to go through the CalVTP process first, secure that approval before we go and seek grant funding, or if there's a risk that that approval expires. Is there kind of a time limit on how long it could take before we are ready to start implementing?
So usually for our grants, if you have your CEQA done ahead of time, that is always very helpful and does help. You usually with our grants, you have a year after your grant approval, your contract is approved to have your CEQA done. So if you don't have the VTP done, you have a year to get it done, and you would budget in your grant, the process for developing and completing the VTP. So there's benefits to also not having your CEQA done ahead of time. It just depends upon what funding you have available now versus if you want to wait and then plan to have the grant reimburse it in the future.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate that.
That all
And
you
the
have?
VTPs are actually good. You should re-look at them after your treatments just to make sure that everything is still in compliance and you're not having any other significant impacts. That's that part of that maintenance. Specific for our department, we will rewrite them every 10 years. So you were asking about timelines or how long the document was good for. So I just thought I'd let you know on that.
Okay,
I'll
great.
follow up on that. So for CAL FIRE, like Shannon said, our projects are 10 years, and that's just kind of our own internal procedure. But for the CalVTP outside of CAL FIRE, it really is kind of that classic CEQA model. So if there's new or relevant information that needs to kind of be involved in an analysis, or something, new species, for example, becomes listed, then that analysis would need to be amended into the actual CEQA document so that is the due diligence is covered there. So there isn't necessarily a hard and fast number, but just as things become relevant to the project itself, that needs to be accounted for.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Abigail, is that all that you had? Did you have a follow-up or are you good?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Greg.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'd like to next call on Alex Brookover. Taking Alex off of mute.
Yeah. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So my question is about the minimum number of treatable acres required to use a CalVTP, specifically on private property. I'm working with Bond Forestry up here in Santa Cruz County, and we have a lot of smaller ownerships that we think would benefit from the program, but I'm not sure if they qualify, if there is a minimum. And if there is, are we able to apply in non-contiguous acres and involve multiple ownerships if it's a like setting?
So there is not a minimum, but it would be beneficial to, because there's not, they also don't have to be contiguous. So if you have a group of landowners that are going to have the same treatment types on all of their properties, and it's within that same like ecoregion and habitat type, it would be beneficial just to put them all under under one if you could. It's, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, to kind of answer your question, maybe a potential question is there's really no upper end limit too. There's projects that are under consideration now in, the tens of thousands of acres. So really it depends on, obviously that's going to be a lot larger and more intensive kind of scoping there. So that's going to be, that SUV will just be a lot bigger, but the size isn't really a factor when it comes to preparing the CalVTP.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate the questions, Alex. Thanks for joining. I'd like to take Scott Cratty off mute. Let's see if this works. Scott, are you there? Would you like to ask your couple of good questions?
Yeah, it's actually Emily Tecchio. I share a Zoom with my executive director. I guess that the last question sort of starting to answer one of my questions. We are kind of wondering if, like, how best to use the CalVTP. I mean, we're a fire safe council, so we wouldn't be filing, but we've been kind of doing NOEs for fuel reduction projects, and our RCD has a mitigated neg deck for all of their watershed restoration projects countywide. And so we were thinking that it would be really interesting if we could get a document for roadside fuel reduction countywide. So it sounds like maybe we'd have to tailor it so that it's in one particular ecoregion, but could we use the CalVTP to do that?
You could. It doesn't necessarily have to be within one ecoregion. That just kind of that helps to give you a boundary. Just like watersheds are a good boundary when doing analysis. But no, you could do a whole county wide. It'd be a lot of roads, because then you could break smaller projects, off of it. But there's nothing that says that you can't. So
okay, and then we would have like technically 10 years to work on all those projects and to secure funding for the actual fuel reduction.
No. That's the 10 years only applies to CAL FIRE when we utilize the document, not to outside agencies. It would be as long as there's been no significant change to the environment, or regulatory changes, or as John mentioned, if there's like a new species that's now been listed that's in your project area, then you're going to have to redo your analysis to make sure you're not having an impact on them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Is that all you've got? Do you have any follow-ups?
I think that's a good start for now.
All right. Thanks for bravely asking the questions. I appreciate the participation. we have another question. I think I'll read it. Lowry works for California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and some of their properties are not included in the treatment areas. And they're wondering if there's a way to use the EIR on state lands that are not included in those treatment areas.
I would have to look at them because unless they're within like an estuary, meadows, as long as it's within the SRA, and it hasn't been excluded because of one of those habitat types, you should be able to use this programmatic EIR. Oh, good. Can you expand on
Lowry,
are you looking at the viewer or?
Lowry, I took you off mute and made you right there, so you could elaborate, please.
Yeah, I'm here now. Get my headphones real quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Sweet. Yeah, so some of them are lagoons, but like part of it would be wetlands and some of it is uplands. I was wondering if it was also because some of them might be in like city jurisdictions, like the city of LA or the city of San Diego and stuff like that.
You can use it for the city. The wetlands have been excluded. So you would probably have to do an addendum for those, or maybe a neg deck associated with it. But in the city, in the LRA, you can have a mix as long as there's some SRA that's within it. It should be I mean, there's no like it has to be 50% SRA and 50% LRA, but as long as there's SRA associated with it, you can use it in that local responsibility area, city of LA. And you would just do an addendum, which it's kind of already built into the VTP, and the frequently asked questions from the training from last year actually dives into that and how to address that. So.
Okay. So like 'cause some of the lagoons that were like, some of it's the lagoon, but some of it has like upland habitat and non-native grasses and stuff like that we might want to restore. Would we be able to maybe use it for that part of the lagoon and not the actual lagoon part?
You might be able to. I think it
Okay.
depends on what treatments you're proposing within there.
Yeah. Well, one of the lagoons caught on fire, and so we might be doing a restoration with SB 85 money.
Just to clarify, Shannon, when you said, when you mentioned an addendum just now, you were referring to the wetlands and not doing some of the LRA land?
As the LRA land. And
Okay.
I think doing the wetlands would depend on the types of treatments that you would be proposing, and whether or not you would, because you'd have to look at the analysis for it. So, and whether you would have a negative deck associated with it or just doing an addendum.
I fielded other questions from people not on this webinar right now about how much LRA land could be, included in this. Could you speak to that a little bit more, Shannon?
There's not a minimum or a maximum, as long as there is SRA associated with it and it falls within the same scope of the PEIR. So you're doing the same treatment activities associated with the same treatment types, then you could utilize that addendum. And it's under the how to use the CalVTP webpage, and then where the spring 2021 trainings were under the presentation there. They actually have a couple of slides on utilizing the addendum and how to fill it out and what type of language you should include in your PSA.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
What a brain trust here. Thanks, Marisa, for that. Lowry, did you have something follow up, or is that getting at your questions?
That's getting at my questions, and if I have any questions, I might just reach out to CAL FIRE then when I actually go down that process.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being live here.
Yep.
Let's see. I'm noticing a question in the Q&A. And it's about the PSA drop-down menu. John, I think you saw that one. I could read it. And it goes, the PSA template on the how to use the CalVTP Board of Forestry website does not have the drop-down features on the document. Where can I find the document that has the drop-down features? That's from Catherine Benedict. Anybody?
Yeah, and I misspoke on that one. So it does not have the drop-down feature. Cal Fire's version does. So you just have to type in the yes or no and if it's applicable. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, because like Shannon said, you can just type in yes or no, and then there's a spot for describing that and what's going on underneath that. So yeah, there's not really a drop down because the inputs would be a yes or a no, and then kind of the explanation will follow. If that makes sense.
Yep, thank you. I see a follow-up on that last conversation about LSA PSAs in the chat, actually, from Kim Batchelder. Says, wouldn't the wetlands fall under federal jurisdiction? Is that something one of you can help with?
I am not sure.
Yeah,
I'm gonna but
Okay.
wetlands are excluded. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that could very well be the reason. Like Shannon, I just know that wetlands are not included under the CalVTP, and for that matter, not really part of the state's prerogative. So that would follow that it's a federal jurisdiction at that point if it's a wetland.
Okay, and similarly, Ellie has added in the Q&A are riparian plant communities within treatable areas, especially because there's sensitivity in those systems.
So those are a part of the when you look at the ecoregions, they include those sensitive plant communities, and so that's something that is analyzed. They generally work doesn't usually occur within like the bed and bank of for these projects with the VTP.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm looking for remaining loose ends. I'm wondering if any of our presenters or Marisa, do you notice anything that I've overlooked? And we have a couple more minutes here to catch the things that have fallen through my cracks.
So there is a question from Kim regarding tribal entities providing feedback. So for the overall PEIR, yes, they were reached out to because of the AB 52 process. So if they provided comment on that. And then also for each specific project, there still are requirements to make notifications to the tribes on the specific projects.
All right, thank you. Any other loose ends here that I've missed?
I see a question.
Kate,
Oh, right.
Yeah, we're just going to address Kate there with her last question. Regarding the ag exclusions and ranches, really does come back to the SRA. So if state responsibility area or local responsibility area, like Shannon said, there's ways of pretty quick addendum to incorporate LRA or that local response area into and under the CalVTP process. So it just depends on that situation and what's going on with that actual exclusion, like whose jurisdiction is it? And as long as it's SRA or LRA, it would be able to be treated by the CalVTP.
Thanks, John. Yep, and I see Jason's hand, so I'm not sure. It's been up a while now that I noticed. I'm going to allow you to talk, Jason. If you're there, you can, and you still have a question or not, you're allowed to talk.
All right. Well, thank you. I had a question that I put in the chat, which was probably a mistake, and so I kind of have two. It's kind of a long question, I guess, but I have two conceptual projects that I'm working on or would like to develop. One of which is basically I'm working to operate a CFIP clone. So it's a landowner incentives program that covers 4 counties. And I'm wondering whether or not it would be beneficial to develop a VTP to cover the scoping within such a large project area, and like how conceptually, once you've done your scoping, which is reduced from the state level, right? And like we could identify what sensitive plant and animal communities would be there, right? But then we'd eventually have to do surveys for when project areas that we don't know yet the location of, you know, like when, how would that all work within the VTP framework and the reporting requirements? And it's a longer question, but I'm just gonna leave it there for a second.
So that's a harder one because when you're evaluating your impacts, you really should know where your project is and where you'll be working. You do have to do the specific surveys prior to implementation. So that's a little bit more tricky of one. We have projects that are quite large that have been approved as on the board's website. So I think
Yeah, I think as far as like CEQA process, it's the ability for really that intent, getting back to who can make that discretionary decision and how does that kind of package or project track through the process. And when you have that kind of, like Shannon said, you don't have a clear description, it's hard to do an appropriate analysis. So I think that it's not a hard stop, but it would just require some kind of process of thinking through how that analysis would be appropriate if we're unsure of this kind of scope and scale of the actual project.
Yeah, I was just wondering how that would fit in, what with amendments. So if you, as projects came along, if you would be able to say, okay, here's a 5-acre project that came in under what are predetermined actions, you know, like timber stand improvement or something like that, right?
I see.
So that was that. And then I think the other one would work a little better because I'm working with multiple landowners and trying to come up with like a 10,000 acre rough planning area. And I think that would make sense because we could actually identify real projects within that planning area. And I guess that under that situation, we would probably just submit a new VTP. Or I guess this is a good question. Like, so if it's 10,000 acres, we're not going to do 10,000 acres in a year, right? But we might start with the fuel break, ridgetop fuel break that's identified. And then we might follow that up 2 years later with a prescribed burn that burns through a grassland into this, you know, treated area. But like all these things might take place over the next 10 years. And I'm just wondering, like, how does that fit in? Do you reference back to the original posted, you know, on the Board of Forestry website VTP, or do you file something new every single time?
Great.
So your PSA should address like everything that you want to do and where you want to do it. So it's understandable that you are going to go in first and have a fuel break on this ridgetop. And then, you know, when you have the funding, you're going to go back in and do a prescribed burn, which could be 2-3 years later. And then you might go in another 2 years later and do like an herbicide treatment to help maintain it. Like, as if you have that all spelled out in that PSA, then that is appropriate. But if you are thinking you have a 10,000 acre area and you're not necessarily sure like what projects you want to do where and what treatments you want to use, then it's not really the best tool for that. I would be more like on a project specific basis.
All right. Sorry to have to cut Jason off. It sounds like a great conversation, and I'm sure you've got the resources, Jason, to now reach out to the right people with follow-up questions. I'm going to hand it, and thanks for the many good questions and the on-the-fly answers. This is complex stuff. That was enjoyable to moderate at any rate. Hopefully people got good stuff out of that. And then so, Marisa, you want to close the meeting?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gray. And I really just want to give a hearty thank to Shannon and John here. They're the two rock stars running our state's vegetation management program. Couldn't do it without people like you really taking the time to come in, get into some of these questions and really explain. This truly is an amazing kind of watershed document to really expedite some of the work we need to do. I did enter in a way of business. I did enter my email into the chat. If you have further questions, please send them to me and I will send them along. Also, I will be emailing all of the participants a recording of this session. And also I'm going to put in the chat too real quick, and this will be in your email. If you'd like to see more trainings of this or other types, we are building out a fuels management training program at Swamp Pacific Ranch. There are a lot of virtual and webinar trainings we are planning in the works. So please don't hesitate to get on our mailing list. I promise I won't be spamming you with things. Thank you, everyone. Just a wonderful webinar. I can't thank our speakers enough. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.